Hi everyone, let's continue our series about nutrition, and today I'm gonna talk about the body self-defense system. I've already spoken about how the body defends against weight loss and favors weight regain after a diet, and why it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. This self-defense system utilizes three strategies to defend our body against perceived starvation. 1. It slows metabolic rate through metabolic adaptation. 2. It activates genes that favor weight regain. 3. It causes changes to your biology that make it more difficult to lose weight in the future. Now it's time to dive deep into the biology of this self-defense system. First, I need to define what is metabolism and why it is so important. Metabolism is defined as the chemical changes in living cells by which energy is provided for vital processes and activities and new material is assimilated. On a basic level, it's the process of extracting energy from the food you eat and producing energy to power your cell's biological processes. The molecules in food, like amino acids, sugars, fats, and others, all contain energy that can be extracted through the process of metabolism. The end product of macronutrient metabolism is the molecule adenosine triphosphate ATP as well as water and carbon dioxide. ATP is our energy currency. The process of hydrolysing ATP is used to drive many cellular reaction. If we eat an excess amount of energy compared to the ATP we burn, then we store this energy in adipose tissue and, to a lesser extent, lean mass and glycogen. If we eat fewer calories than required to produce the ATP needed to run these chemical processes, then that delta of energy must be taken from storage in the form of adipose tissue and, to a lesser extent, from lean body mass and glycogen. When we refer to someone who has a fast metabolism, it means that their body is inefficient at production and usage of ATP on a cellular level, and that they end up wasting a lot of potential energy. These people are the Ferraris of metabolism, and they burn through a lot of energy. If we refer to someone as having a slow metabolism, then that person is likely very efficient at ATP production and utilization. Someone with an efficient, or in other words slow metabolism, is able to waste less ATP and produce more of it from less energy intake, meaning fat storage is easier for this person. How much energy goes to waste is in large part determined by the thermogenesis occurring in the body. Thermogenesis refers to the production of heat through dissipation of energy calories. On a cellular level, much of this occurs in the mitochondria through the activity of uncoupling proteins. These proteins cause uncoupling of the mitochondrial membrane, which makes ATP production less efficient, and the wasted energy is given off as heat. I won't enter into details, it's better to keep it simple. So remember, someone with a fast metabolism produces overall less ATP and burns more calories, producing more heat as a waste product, than someone with a slow metabolism, who is more efficient in extracting energy from the same amount of calories. As I just said before, dieting activates your body's self-defense system. However, this isn't a switch you just turn on or off, it's a proportionate response. The more severe the energy deficit is and the longer is maintained, the greater the signal to activate this system. If a person who doesn't typically diet goes on a 12-week diet plan to shed a few kilos, it's not comparable with someone trying for the 10th time in a series of yo-yo dieting to lose 10 kilograms or more. There are three main factors that will determine how strong the activation of the self-defense system will be. 1. The severity of the energy deficit. 2. How long does the deficit last? 3. How frequently deficits are imposed. It is important to clarify that not all diets have the same impact on this system. I don't want to scare the shit out of you, so you'll never go on a diet. That's not my purpose. My goal is to raise your awareness on how to plan and execute a diet plan minimizing risks of failure and weight regaining. So, the first prong of the body's self-defense system is metabolic adaptation, to reduce your total daily energy expenditure. What's interesting is that the drop in metabolic rate is almost always greater than you would predict based on the person's lean body mass and activity level. It is possible to predict with relative accuracy what someone's metabolic rate should be based on different equations that calculate your basal metabolic rate, or BMR. However, in people who diet, especially those who have done it for long periods of time, we find that their BMR is much lower than it should be. It's like body overreacts to dieting. Many people find it pretty easy to lose weight in the first week, when their metabolic rate is still normal. assuming that they haven't already engaged in a lot of yo-yo diet that slowed their metabolic rate. But, over time, your metabolic rate slows to adapt to the calorie deficit. A great example of this is the case study by Russo, where their subjects' BMR dropped from around 2,400 calories per day to a shocking 1,200 calories per day. Keep in mind that this subject was not a tiny person. This was a 100 kilograms male bodybuilder with about 85 kilograms of lean body mass. In fact, if we plugged his data into one of the equations used to predict BMR like the Muller equation or Benedict-Harris, there will be a specific part dedicated to them. We would get the following predicted BMR. Pre-diet, his BMR would be equal to 2,118 calories per day. Post-diet, his BMR would be equal to 1,973 calories per day. If we assess the pre-diet measurement, he actually has a faster metabolic rate than prediction. 2,424 kilocalories per day actual against 2,118 kilocalories predicted. However, check out the difference in the predicted metabolic rate versus actual metabolic rate after dieting. His predicted BMR was 1973 kcal, but its real BMR was 1283 kcal per day. That was shocking. He got way more efficient during the 24 weeks caloric restriction. In fact, his metabolic rate was almost cut in half. The metabolic adaptation. Actual BMR less predicted BMR is astonishing. 690 kilocalories per day difference and about 35% lower than predicted. This massive difference is what's known as metabolic adaptation. Metabolic adaptations affect your TDE in nearly every component. So let's see its effects. Let's start from BMR. During caloric restriction, the body's basal metabolic rate adapts to decrease in energy intake by drop in energy expenditure significantly. Now, BMR encompasses many metabolic processes, so referring to it as a single aspect of metabolic adaptation is a bit misleading. However, for the sake of simplicity, I'll keep that way. Most available researches suggest that the reduction in BMR during dieting is about 15% lower than predicted on average, but can be far greater in extreme cases. Much of this decline in BMR is due to the reduction in weight and lean mass from dieting. Since lean mass, and to a much lesser extent, fat mass are metabolically active tissues, you'll have a reduction in BMR as you lose weight just due to less overall tissue and less energy needed to carry around the reduced body mass. This change in body mass, however, is not nearly enough to account for the total decrease in energy expenditure. It's likely that the level of adaptation is proportionate to the level and duration of restriction. As we saw above, the Russo's case study reported a 35% decrease in BMR. Further, the participants from the TV show The Biggest Loser demonstrated over a 20% metabolic adaptation that persisted even 6 years after the show has ended. Now let's move to NEAT. NEAT is probably the component of your TDE which is most affected during calorie restriction. Indeed, research has shown NEAT to be reduced by a massive 400 calories per day in people who lost at least 10% of their body weight. While some people dismiss the changes in NEAT, claiming that it's modifiable and that people can make it up for it by simply moving more, this isn't the case. There are some ways to help you consume more calories, like getting a standing desk or use the stairs instead of the elevator in order to keep your NEAT up. But however, you'll probably get tired and you will not do some other tasks, and so you save some calories, decreasing at the end of the day your NEAT. So it's important that you account that while calculating the total calories you need to consume in order to lose weight. Otherwise, you risk to be at maintenance, in the best case, or in a surplus in the worst scenario. Now let's talk about the effect on TEF. TEF as a percentage of TDE seems to be largely unaffected by dieting. However, since you're eating less food, the absolute amount of calories burned through TEF will be lower while the relative rate may be the same. Remember that TEF is a very small portion of your daily caloric output, 15%, so even if it's unchanged, it doesn't seem to have a huge impact. At last, exercise. Dieting reduces the amount of energy you expend during exercise. You have less total energy, so your level of intensity during exercise will decrease. You might take longer breaks or shorten your workout, therefore impacting on the amount of calories burned. However, the important thing is that you continue to exercise and do your cardio, trying to keep the same intensity, if possible, or reducing it by the least possible amount, for you to keep exercising with proper form and avoid injuries. Now let's see what other metabolic adaptations occurs during a calorie restriction. While adaptations to weight loss and low-calorie dieting happen on a grand scale, they also occur on the smallest cellular level. During dieting, the body adapts by increasing mitochondrial efficiency so that you're able to produce more energy and less waste from the food that you eat. Your cell's mitochondria are able to pump out more ATP. Part of this may be explained by the reduction in uncoupling proteins from weight loss. In fact, uncoupling proteins reduce the efficiency of ATP production in the mitochondria and cause extra energy to be released as heat. Thus, these uncoupling proteins are very thermogenic. From an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense that these adaptive thermogenic proteins are turned off during weight loss as part of the body's defense system, so you don't waste energy when food is scarce. In fact, it's been demonstrated that a greater decrease in the expression of uncoupling proteins in skeletal muscle is associated with greater metabolic slowing during weight loss. Also, the endocrine system is a target for metabolic adaptation. Most scientists agree that fat loss typically occurs not through a reduction in fat cell numbers, but in fat cell size. As fat cells shrink from weight loss, they reduce their secretion of a hormone called leptin, which is a major control hormone for fat loss and fat gain. When you reduce your calories and drop your body fat levels, the shrinking fat cells reduce their leptin output. Leptin not only responds to the long-term changes in fat cell size, but also to short-term energy flux across adipocyte. That is, fat cells can be smaller in size, but short-term overfeeding can increase leptin, but on this there will be a specific focus in another video when I'll discuss on how to prevent body fat regaining. Interestingly, several studies have demonstrated that leptin levels are reduced to a greater extent than would be predicted by the amount of fat loss that occurs, even after weight has stabilized. This is consistent with the data cited previously demonstrating that caloric restriction causes more metabolic slowing in proportion of the amount of fat that is lost. Not only that, eating at a deficit and losing fat lowers the output of thyroid hormone, T3, and raises thyroid-stimulating hormone, TSH, which also contributes to the lower metabolic rate. Furthermore, energy-restricted weight loss is also accompanied by reduced sympathetic nervous system tone. While the previously mentioned hormones fall, the hormone ghrelin rise as a result of the deficit and weight loss. Increased ghrelin contributes to an increase in appetite with weight loss. There's a reason it has the nickname the hunger hormone. The rise in ghrelin levels and the decrease in leptin could explain why dieting becomes progressively more difficult. Together they cause hunger levels to go up and make it more difficult to feel satiated. These aren't the only hormones that change during caloric restriction and may affect metabolic rate. Other hormones that have less of an effect on metabolic rate like testosterone, estrogen, and other sex hormone also change during a caloric deficit. Interestingly, cortisol concentrations have been observed to significantly increase during caloric restriction, which cause you to feel hungrier. Your body doesn't only activating metabolic adaptations to slow down metabolic rate, thus decreasing energy expenditure, but also it alters the milieu of hormone that regulates satiety. Hormones like PYY, CCK, and GLP-1 are responsible to make you feel less hungry, and during a calorie restriction diet, their levels are reduced to a significant extent. While those hormones goes down, the hungry responsible ones like ghrelin and orexigenic peptides, such as neuropeptide Y and agouti-related peptides in the brain are significantly high. This reduction in total daily energy expenditure combined with an increase in hunger and decrease in satiety form the energy gap, where more energy is desired than is required in response to caloric restriction and weight loss. It's also worth mentioning that insulin levels decline during caloric restriction. As fat cells shrink, they become more insulin sensitive, and thus less insulin is required to dispose of glucose and drive fats to adipose tissue. This is a good thing from a health perspective, but terrible from a weight regain perspective. You see, small, insulin-sensitive adipocytes also typically secrete low amounts of leptin, which makes them extremely efficient at storage fat. Think of adipocytes like sponges. If a sponge is soaking wet, you can't use it to catch anything else. In our case, fats. But if you wring it out that same sponge as much as you can, then it becomes very efficient in soaking up liquid fats. Further, insulin and leptin both circulate in the body in proportion to fat mass and bind to receptors in the brain that increase expression of anorexigenic peptides and decrease expression of the orexigenic ones. This is part of the second prong of the body self-defense system, which prepares your body for regaining body fat even before you've finished your diet. Not only do hormonal adaptation to dieting increase your propensity to regain weight as body fat, but other aspects of metabolic adaptation activate during dieting that predispose your body to regaining body fat once you stop. Possibly, the most powerful adaptation is the increased efficiency of refeeding during caloric restriction. You see, when you diet and impose an energy gap, the body becomes more efficient at using energy during that restriction. But research has also shown that when you increase food intake above maintenance after you've been dieting, your body more efficiently stores it as fat. Not only that, but it appears that both LBM and body fat are regained differentially from where it was lost. Research has demonstrated that as weight is regained in the post-diet phase, fat is preferentially stored in the trunk, and lean body mass is preferentially regained in the extremities. This is significant because it appears that LBM in the trunk has a greater effect on metabolic rate compared to LBM in the extremities. How does all of this affect us? Let's make a hypothetical example of two genetically identical people. Person A goes on a diet for a month and loses weight and body fat, while person B eats at maintenance. After 1 month, let's assume both people are at the same weight and body fat level, meaning person A had to lose body fat to reach person B's level. If you challenge them both with a high-calorie day that is the same relative increase in calories, person A will store significantly more body fat than person B due to the increased refeeding efficiency, while person B is more likely to waste some of that surplus energy through heat as a result of thermogenesis. We all know that saying you won't get fat from just one bad meal. Yet that's true, because it takes a period of time of overeating to become fat again. But that doesn't mean that in the one meal you haven't gained any fat, because you did, because our body are designed to do that. But don't despair. Sometimes it may happen to fall off the wagon and overeat. We all fail, but the consistency is the key. As long as you recognize what you did wrong, why you overate, and go back to your training and diet routine, you are back on track. When you do something wrong, don't be too harsh on yourself and punish you. That's lead only to bad habits. Instead, acknowledge and assess the situation to understand what went wrong, then forgive yourself and start again. That's the right mindset to achieve your goal and to keep the weight off and learn new and healthy habits you can maintain for the rest of your life, which is the final purpose of these videos. The adaptations that occur within the adipose tissue in response to weight loss and caloric restriction are perhaps the most fascinating of all. It was long believed that adipose tissue was a biologically inert tissue. That is, it was believed that adipose tissue only existed as a storage depot for energy, mainly in the form of triacylglycerides, which occupy the vast majority of adipocyte volume. We now know that adipose tissue is an organ that integrates hormonal signals and secretes its own hormones called adipokines, which communicates with other tissues of the body, including the brain. Research has shown that adipose tissue plays a great role in self-defense system. During energy restriction, adipocyte volume decreases, signaling a reduction in nutrient availability and an energy gap. This is conveyed to the brain via decreased secretion from adipose, a reduction in circulating insulin. In fact, insulin levels are inversely related to adipocyte volume and possibly decreased sympathetic nervous system tone. Signals to the brain reflect not only long-term nutrient availability but short-term nutrient availability as well. Thus, the body senses not only how much energy is currently stored, but the direction and the intensity of energy flux across the adipocyte. This is demonstrated by the ability of short-term overfeeding to restore leptin level even though pre-diet body fat levels have not been achieved. For example, even at high levels of body fat, when your adipocytes are plenty big, you may notice a pretty good surge in hunger in the first few days after you begin dieting. This short-term increase in hunger is likely triggered by the short-term drop in leptin due to the decreased flux of glucose and fats into the adipocytes. In contrast, even at lower levels of body fat, hunger may be temporarily reduced by short-term increases in leptin after refeeding as results of the flux of glucose and fats into the adipocytes. That said, it's the overall size of the adipocytes that seem to have the biggest impact on overall energy expenditure and satiety in most cases. These short and long-term signals integrate in the hindbrain and hypothalamus, which serve as the control center for energy balance regulation. In response to these signals of reduced energy reserves from the adipose tissue, energy expenditure declines, and appetite increases through increased expression of peptides like neuropeptide Y, a gouty-related peptide, and decreased expression of propionmelanocartin. This produces the previously referred to energy gap, where more energy is desired than requires. It's not just the hormonal and neuroendocrine signals that impact energy gap. The actual structure of adipose tissue seems to make an impact as well. As fat mass is lost and the adipocytes shrink, the extracellular matrix must be remodeled around them to accommodate the change. It has been hypothesized that weight loss places a strain on the extracellular matrix of adipocytes, which results in an altered metabolic profile that favors weight regain to relieve the cellular stress and mechanical strain on the adipocyte. This fits with the theme of the body's self-defense system setting you up for weight regain even while you're still on a diet. Perhaps even more interesting is the notion that massive refeeding in the immediate post-diet period may increase the production of small fat cells called preadipocytes. This was first demonstrated by MacLean, who noted the formation of a population of small fat cells produced from a process called preadipocyte differentiation, a process by which preadipocytes turn into fully formed adipocytes during overfeeding in early weight regain in the post-diet period. This resulted in an increase in total fat cells number by almost 50%. Normally, total fat mass is a reflection of the size of adipocytes, and the total cell number doesn't change. This is not to say that adipocytes stay around forever once they're formed. In fact, fat cell turnover exists, where new adipocytes are produced and mature adipocytes are cleared at a rate of about 8 to 10% per year, but this turnover is under extremely tight regulation that normally prevents changes in cell number. That regulation can be overridden under certain circumstances, including morbidly obese people when the maximum capacity of the adipocyte to store lipids is exceeded, though to be around 100 micrometers in diameter per cell. As the adipocytes approach this size, new fat cells can be formed through differentiation of preadipocyte into fully formed adipocytes to provide more space to store fat. Interestingly, it appears that this increase in fat cell number can also occur even when the maximal cell size is not approached, specifically in the early post-diet period, where weight relapse begins. MacLean noted that the unique hormonal milieu, low T3, increased THS, low leptin, low insulin, decreased of sympathetic nervous system tone, and severely reduced rates of fatty acid oxidation created an environment that favored preadipocyte differentiation into fully formed adipocytes when subjects engaged in rapid weight gain post-diet. Both SNS and T3 have an inhibitory effect on preadipocyte differentiation, and these hormones are reduced during the early post-diet phase from previously energy restriction. During this early post-diet period, it has also been suggested that signals reflecting short-term nutrient availability play a more critical role in preadipocyte differentiation than long-term energy store signals. During the immediate post-diet phase, as massive amounts of energy are made available, it may override that existing adipocyte's ability to effectively clear the nutrients, glucose and fatty acid, due to 1. The unique milieu previously mentioned. 2. The drastically decreased rates of fat oxidation in adipocytes. Fats literally being stuffed into adipocyte at a much greater rate than they can oxidize them. This could theoretically trigger pre-differentiation in an attempt by the body to preemptively create greater capacity for storage of energy rather than wasting it. Essentially, what I'm saying is that if you regain weight too fast in the early post-diet period, you might actually increase your fat cell number. This is potentially a huge problem for weight regain and may, at least in part, explain the phenomenon of body fat overshooting. Remember our discussion on body fat set point. The set point is thought to reflect the size of the individual fat cells. Thus, even though one may have regained the total amount of fat back after massive refeeding post-diet, their individual fat cells may now be smaller due to an increase in overall fat cell number, and this may signal to the body that the set point hasn't been met. As a result, leptin levels may not be as high as they were previously at the same body fat level, and it may drive your body to continue gaining fat until the adipocytes each return to their previous cell size. While the current data demonstrating this phenomenon is in animals, since demonstrating it in humans is problematic, there is evidence that this process occurs across species based on some human data. This is the final and perhaps most powerful prong of the self-defense system. Increasing the number of total fat cells, also known as hyperplasia, would make future weight loss efforts even more difficult and cause the body to defend a new body fat set point. This is a major reasons why it is so important to understand how to behave after the diet is over in order to prevent a mess. I want to be clear, however, that this is a unique situation. The post-diet dynamic rapid weight regain where fat cells hyperplasia may take place. This is not going to happen to someone who regains all their body fat, but does so at a slowed pace. This situation likely only happens in those who lose significantly amounts of weight, then aggressively gain a significant amount back in a short period of time, likely a few weeks or less. Now that you know how our body self-defense system works, you may asking yourself, why do we get fat? If your body fat set point is so highly regulated, then how do we exceed it and gain weight past our set point? Some speculated that genetics drives the obesity crisis, but that's unlikely. Large-scale changes in genetics take many generations, but obesity became a crisis in less than a generation. A blink when put in terms of evolution. Therefore, it's extremely unlikely that all or most people who becomes obese simply have bad genes. It is more likely that genetics can predispose us to obesity, and you combine that with an obesogenic environment, free access to highly palatable, cheap, and calorie-dense foods, and a sedentary lifestyle, you got the recipe for the obesity epidemic. It's not all just physiological, however. Overeating isn't just driven by physiology. It's also psychology and sociology. You see, nowadays food is everywhere. On social media, on commercials, on the TV. Food is part of our culture. Unfortunately, our body doesn't know that today food is not scarce at all. Actually, is quite the opposite, and still it activates this self-defense system that predisposes us towards weight regain and reduces the chances of future dieting success. Therefore, we need to heed the advice of McLean, who stated, to ensure success, the regain prevention strategies will likely need to be as comprehensive, persistent, and redundant as the biological adaptations they are attempting to counter. So now you know all the bad stuff. Now it's time to get serious and start talking how to lose weight, but more important, how to keep it off for good. Hope you like the video. If so, you can comment, like, and subscribe to the channel. Let's go one more step towards success.